Relationships and seesaws, they are really pretty similar. Some are big and some are small. Some are safe and padded, while others are dangerous and tall. There's strong ones, and not so strong ones, and too many others to count. But no matter the shape or size, they share one thing the same. They have to have two to work. And depending on who is part of the two, they could go nowhere, or somewhere further than intended. Or maybe they're matched perfectly, but their rhythm is, let's just say, less than splendid. Regardless of the case, one thing's for sure. To do it alone isn't fun. It's downright impossible. So let's talk about how to do it better. Seesaw, how do you balance your relationships?
We are starting a new series tonight here at Worship Uncoiled. And this series is all about, nice, that works well, excellent. This series is all about boundaries. I know that's not something that that we talk about a whole lot. Excuse me. In some areas of our lives, like, we understand boundaries really, really easily. Like, for example, on a dry day like today, we want the fire to stay within its boundary, in the fire pit. If the fire were to get out of its boundary, bad things happen.
It already is.
And Smokey the Bear once wisely said, only you can prevent wildfires.
Wouldn't the grass catch on fire and then the whole wood cut?
Exactly. We understand boundaries when it comes to, like, fire. We understand boundaries when it comes to sports. You have to keep the ball in bounds. You have to avoid going outside of the boundary line. Excuse me, goodness. We understand physical boundaries, like walls. Like, it's not very often that we're like, I'm gonna go walk through this wall today. Because we understand a wall is a physical boundary. So now I want to tell you something that's really, 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 really important. And it's not said enough. You are worthy of boundaries in your relationships. You are worthy of boundaries in your relationships. It's so important that we understand this. Because I think so often we walk around and we tend to be, at least I tend to be, and if you guys are anything like me, then you may feel this as well. I tend to be a little bit insecure with myself. And so when it comes to setting boundaries, I tend to shy away from setting boundaries because I feel insecure, or maybe I feel a little unworthy, or I just want people to like me. But the truth of the matter is you and I are worthy of setting boundaries in our relationships. And so this month we're going to talk about boundaries. We're going to talk about how to set boundaries, how to hold our boundaries when people push against our boundaries. But tonight I want to start here. I want to simply start with, what is a boundary? Because it's talked about so little that I think sometimes we forget. We don't necessarily forget, we just don't understand what a boundary is in the relationships with other people. And so I read this book. It's a book called Boundaries. It was written by two doctors of psychology, I think. But anyway, they, in the very first chapter, they laid out their definition for boundaries, and it's an incredible definition. I want to read it to you. Boundaries define us. They define what is me and what is not me. A boundary shows me where I end and where someone else begins. And it leads us to a sense of ownership. I love one line in there, and that's this. A boundary defines where I end and another person begins. Figuring out where I end and where another person begins is actually really, really difficult in our lives. Like, for example, you have this friend. He comes up to you. He wants to borrow something. So Timmy just waved at me. He wants to borrow something of mine. He comes up, CJ, can I borrow 20 bucks? All right. So at what point do I end and Timmy begin? Timmy wants to borrow 20 bucks. Okay. Timmy wants to borrow 100 bucks. Timmy wants to borrow $1,000. At some point in there's got to be a boundary that can define where you end and where the other person begins. When your responsibilities and their responsibilities. So this applies to when people borrow stuff from us. This applies to us physically. This applies to us with our time, with our energy. This applies to us across the board in our relationships. Figuring out where I end and where the other person begins. Because if I can give of myself, as long as it's within me, then I can do that out of joy. But the moment I get to that point where I'm giving of myself and I'm like, dude, oh my goodness, Aaron wants something again. Like, we've blurred the lines between where I end and where someone else begins. So we have to figure this out. We have to figure out, where do I end and where does someone else begin? And it's really, really difficult in our culture because at a very, very early age, we are taught to give of ourselves. At a very early age, we are taught that if you want to be a good friend, then you are nice to that person. If your friend wants something that you have, what do? You share, right? If your friend wants to do something and maybe you're not super into doing that thing, what do? You compromise. Maybe you sacrifice some of the things that you want to do. And we're taught you got to be nice, you got to be kind, you got to give of yourself to other people. We're taught this in friendships. We're also taught this with authority figures. We're taught from a very, very early age that if an authority figure tells you to do something, you do it. If a parent tells you to do something, you do it. If a teacher tells you to do something, you do it. If a coach tells you to do something, you do it. And we are taught this in a form that it doesn't matter what they ask or how they ask, you are expected to do it. The old phrase, I say jump, you say how high. And hear me clearly, being kind, being nice, sharing, giving of yourself, listening to authority, those are all great things. But the problem is that we have focused so much on one end, which is giving ourselves away, that we have neglected the other end that brings us balance, that is, where are our boundaries in our relationships? All right. I need someone who will volunteer, all right, that thinks they have some really good balance. Because relationships are all about balance. All right, Timmy's already up here. All right, Timmy. Here, step back here out of the smoke a little bit. I don't want the smoke affecting your balance. All right. Stand right here. Feet shoulder width apart. Okay? All right, you're good. All right, so this is how our lives are meant to be lived. In our relationships, our lives are meant to be lived in balance, standing on two legs, firm on the ground. One leg is where we give ourselves to other people. We sacrifice, we're kind, we're nice, we listen to authority, we do the things that we're supposed to do. The other leg is where we set boundaries with other people. Boundaries bring us balance in life. Boundaries allow us to protect ourselves, take care of ourselves, and love ourselves while we also are kind and caring and listening to other people. So as long as we are standing right here, we have balance in our relationships, right? It doesn't really do much. I'm not really pushing Timmy over. But the problem is, what happens is that from a very, very early age, we are taught you don't set boundaries. All right, Timmy, stand on one leg. Because we don't set boundaries in life, right? Like, People tell us to do something, we do it. Friends ask us to share, we keep that balance there. Friends ask us to share, we share. And we're taught, you give of yourself. You deny yourself. You take a step back from yourself. And we start to lose balance in our relationships. And this leads to a whole host of frustrating emotions and feelings. And what happens is someone asks us to do something and we're good for a little bit. Don't put that leg down.
I'm not.
You're not setting boundaries here, right? We're not setting boundaries. They ask us to do a little bit of something, we're good. But then they ask us to do a little bit more and, Timmy, you're not supposed to set a boundary. Why'd you put that other foot down?
Oh, Timmy.
Come on, man.
Can I switch him out?
Right? And in order, all right, you can have a seat. Give Timmy a hand. Well done. Here's the thing. In relationships, if we want the healthiest, best relationships that we can have, we have to have balance. We have to have both, where we are giving of ourselves, where we listen to authority, where we share with our friends, but we also have to have this idea of I know who I am and I know what I'm worthy of. And I'm worthy of setting some boundaries so that I can protect and love myself. And when we do that, our friendships are stronger. Our relationships with our parents and our teachers and our coaches and our authority figures are stronger. Our relationships with people around us that are acquaintances are stronger because we have balance in our relationships. And here's what happens, and we'll talk about this a little bit more all month long. What often happens is, you'll notice when I pushed Timmy and he set that foot down, what did I do? I said, come on, Timmy, you're not supposed to set boundaries.
Timmy.
And what happens is, when we try to live our life in balance, the first reaction of those around us is going to be like, what are you doing? This is a little crazy. Because our culture does not teach us to live in balance. It does not teach us to set boundaries. So your first reaction, and I've experienced this firsthand, guys, the first reaction is going to be, come on, dude, you're not supposed to do that. But when you hold firm and you say, no, our relationship is going to have balance, you will find that your relationships are stronger. I love this story from the Bible. It's in Matthew chapter 22, verses 35 through 40. These people come to test Jesus. They come to trip him up. They come to ask him a question, and they ask him this question so that no matter how he answers this question, they are going to be able to be like, dude, you failed. You're wrong. And so this guy comes up to Jesus and he says, Jesus, what is the most important commandment? What's the greatest commandment above them all? And some of you have heard this before. Jesus says the greatest commandment is this: love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, with everything that you are. And the second commandment is just like it: love your neighbor as you love yourself. Now, I have heard this verse preached, taught. I've read books on this verse. And this verse often focuses on one of two things. One, it focuses on loving God, which is vitally important. That we love God with everything that we have. That's the first and greatest commandment. We love God with all of our hearts and souls and minds and strength. We love God. Or, when this verse is taught on, they focus on this. They focus on love your neighbor. And they go into this idea of we've got to love people around us, which is vitally important. We've got to give of ourselves to other people, which is vitally important. That's something we should be doing. But I love what Jesus adds. Don't miss this. Because for so long, I missed this. You ready? Jesus says this. You guys listen? Jesus says this. love your neighbor as you love yourself. Jesus isn't just telling us to love God and love other people. There's a third aspect to that brings balance to this. Jesus says, love God, love other people, love yourself. So often we miss that third aspect. Love God, love other people, love yourself. Jesus says the way that we love other people should be the way that we love ourselves. And so if we are going out, we are trying to love other people well, then we should be loving ourselves well. If we are going out and we are giving to other people, guess what that means? Jesus says we should also be pouring in and giving to ourselves. If we are going out and we are being kind to other people, that means, guess what? We should be kind to ourselves. There is balance there. There's this idea of figuring out, where do I end and the next person begin? So that I can love myself well, and I can love the person I'm in a relationship well as well. And so the question becomes, how do you love yourself? And I think a lot of times when we think about loving ourselves, we picture going out and like having this arrogant attitude of like, dude, I'm awesome. And I don't think that's what Jesus is talking about here. Jesus is simply saying this: if you want to love yourself well, know yourself. Let me say that again. If you want to love yourself well, know yourself. You guys, we feel emotions all the time. And so often what we do is, instead of knowing ourselves well, instead of acknowledging and feeling and understanding those emotions that are inside of us, we take them and we shove them down and hide them away. We have emotions in relationships with others. And so often we are so focused on the other person that we ignore our own emotions and what we're feeling. And what we'll find out this month as we talk about boundaries is that feeling, understanding, knowing all of those emotions that are a part of ourselves are vitally important to knowing where we end and the next person begins. It's vitally important to setting the boundaries in our relationships, in our lives. Because in this verse where Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself, he is basically saying this: you are worthy of setting some boundaries. You are worthy of setting some boundaries in your relationships. You don't have to sacrifice everything that you are for the other person, because Jesus has told you to love yourself well also. You are worthy of some boundaries in your relationships. I want to read one last quote from this book. And I will post a picture of this to Facebook so that you can put it on your phones. This is going to kind of be our practical challenge for the night. And these are just a few questions to kind of figure out who we are, knowing ourselves well, so that we can begin thinking, all right, how can I know myself well so that I can set boundaries well in my relationships, so that my relationships can be stronger. It says, the author of this book, Boundaries, says this: before you say anything confrontive, before you go to someone and you're like, dude, listen, we got to have a talk. Before you say anything confrontive, even before you set the first boundary, examine your heart. Ask yourself, here's a few questions that I want you to really, really think about this week. And again, I'll post this on Facebook. I'll send it out over the text message service so that you guys can really look at these and begin to think about these. Ask yourself, Do I have permission to feel angry when I am controlled by others? Do I have permission to feel angry when I am controlled by others? Am I aware when I am being violated? Do I have enough awareness to understand when I am being violated with my energy, with my things, with my time, physically? Can I hear my early warning signal? You guys, we have signals inside of us that go off all the time that say, you're going to have to set a boundary soon. You're going to have to set a boundary soon. And so often, we just miss them. Can I hear my early warning signals? He says, if so, if you can answer these questions, you are on the right track. If not, this is a good time to work on finding a safe place to tell the truth. And we'll talk about finding a safe place to tell the truth and practice setting boundaries. And we'll get into all that next week. Are you, as you are better able to be honest about differences and disagreements, you will be better able to allow your anger to help you. So I want you to think about those questions. Are you allowed to be angry when you're controlled? Are you aware of when you're being violated? And do you recognize your early warning signals? You guys, the truth is, and this is what I want really to stick with you, you are worthy of some boundaries. Your relationships with others are worthy of some boundaries. They bring health, they bring security, and it's the way that God intended relationships to work. So that everybody is clear on where one person starts and where the next person ends. So this week, hop on Facebook, pull up the texting service, and just take a look at those questions and really begin to think about those 3 questions. Let me pray for you. God, thank you so much.